I think I'd like to start, though, by asking you about your role with the Clinton Foundation and what you find most enjoyable, in addition to what you were just describing, which is terrific.
Well, I love working with my parents. It's a tremendous amount of fun. And I love being able to build on the work that my father started now 12 years ago to help push it into areas that I think are crucial where we hadn't been before. So if we think about the Clinton Health Access Initiative work, for example, that's work that my father started in 2002 to change the dynamics around antiretroviral pricing in the developing world. In 2002, most people in the United States who were HIV positive had access to antiretrovirals. Only about 35,000 people living in the developing world had access to antiretrovirals. They were far too expensive. They were $10,000 to $15,000 a year, depending on where you were in the world. And my father recognized that that was a classic market failure. And so he worked very hard with the generic drug manufacturers around the world to change the market dynamics from being one of high cost and low volume to being high volume and low cost. And so today, and again the price varies depending on where you are, it's about $130 to $200 a year for antiretrovirals. And so that is work that the foundation had already started to push into different areas, particularly in vaccinations for the pneumococcal vaccine or the pentavalent vaccine, and work that I've championed to go into oral rehydration solutions and zinc, which is the predominant treatment for childhood diarrhea across the globe. More than 750,000 children died of childhood severe dehydration due to diarrhea last year. I find that also unacceptable in the 21st century. And so we're working now in 5 African countries that have locally produced what's called ORS zinc for shorthand to change those markets into similarly being a high volume, low cost. I don't know if this was true in Kansas City, but I would wager it probably was. But at the beginning of the 20th century in New York City, the leading causes of childhood death were pneumonia, severe dehydration due to diarrhea, and tuberculosis. Exactly what are the leading causes of childhood death, particularly if you add in malaria, around the world? We solved that challenge in New York City through real public health interventions, building large sanitation and clean water systems, partly because in New York, the Upper East Side and Midtown, where the very wealthy people lived at the beginning of the 20th century, wasn't that far from the very poor neighborhoods of Five Points or the Lower East Side, which at the time was the most densely populated place on Earth. And so there was a vested interest by the vested interests to ensure that the public health of the city improved. Unfortunately, that's not the reality of much of the world. And so while we wait on public health solutions for the longer term, we have to provide treatment in the short term so that no child dies of dehydration in the 21st century.
Let's go back in time, and I wanted to ask, what shaped you as a result of your experiences growing up in the White House? How did that experience really bring you to where you are today?
Oh goodness, I never really know how to answer that question because I don't think of my life in hypotheticals. I can't imagine what it would be like, and candidly I wouldn't want to imagine what it would be like to not have my parents as my parents. And so I can't really imagine what it would have been like to grow up with my father having not been the governor and then being the president, or my mother not having been, as my father always affectionately refers to her as, sort of an NGO of one in the 1980s, and then First Lady and later Senator and Secretary of State. So I don't know how to answer that question in the negative. But in the affirmative, certainly I always believe that those of us who could make a difference were obligated to at least try. That in FDR's famous words, although my husband always argues that really it was Superman who made this famous, that sort of with great power comes great responsibility. With great, it really was FDR in 1941. With great opportunity also comes great responsibility, and that those of us who can make a difference are at least obligated to try. And so we have a family motto that it's always better to get caught trying, and then fill in the blank for whatever it is that we're passionate about or whatever it is that makes us angry that we want to try to solve.
As you may or may not be aware, there is a concerted effort now building across the state of Missouri for the legislature to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And I'm wondering what words of support, ideas, any suggestions you may have as that effort continues to build?
Well, as you may know, I was an early and a big advocate and supporter of the effort in New York State for equal marriage in 2011. And I'm thrilled that I now live in one of the 17 states where we have equal marriage. And I also think this is similarly unfinished business of the 21st century. I mean, I think when we talk about a full participation agenda, it is everyone being able to participate fully to the extent of their talents and their aspirations, to their abilities and their inspiration. Whether we think about disabled Americans, whether we think about young Americans, whether we think about women, whether we think about gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, and questioning Americans. So I think that for those of us who care about civil rights or equal rights, we need to be on the right side of this issue. And I think in New York State, what really made a difference, as in so many things, were the personal connections. I did a lot of phone banking in 2011 for equal marriage, and what really made a difference talking to people on the phone was asking them if they knew anyone who was gay or lesbian or transgendered. Did they have friends who all of a sudden they had to realize didn't have equal rights to those that they themselves enjoyed? And this became even more resonant with me when I got married in 2010. I'm thrilled that I was able to marry my husband. My husband's Jewish. 100 years ago, we may not have been able to really get married in the same open public embrace that we were able to enjoy in 2010. So I think that questions of equal marriage and equal rights are central to at least what I think our country is intended to be when we think about always marching toward a more perfect union. I think we get there, though, through personal stories and personal connections. So I hope that people across the state will think about that and keep engaging in what I think is incredibly important work.